Please start clapping. This guy's amazing. Let's hear for Mr. Brody Stevens, guys. Brody.
Everybody, my name is Stephen Brody Stevens, and I am excited to be here at the #1 comedy club in the world. Will somebody hold my fanny pack? Oh, you will.
This is Positive Connections, a Brody Stevens oral history. Featuring original Periscope audio Brody captured at his home club, Sunset Boulevard's Comedy Store. And I'm comedy journalist and documentarian Julie Seabaugh. Stephen James Brody was born May 22, 1970 in the San Fernando Valley. He died February 22, 2019 in the San Fernando Valley. With father Harold, mother Jackie, and older sister Stephanie, he'd moved to Sacramento during his childhood. His parents divorced when he was 8, and he returned with Jackie and Stephanie to the LA area, where he was a star pitcher at Reseda High School and earned a scholarship to play Division I baseball for the Arizona State Sun Devils. When his sports career was cut short, he took a stand-up class from Sandy Shore, prompting him to pursue comedy in earnest from Seattle, Washington.
My name is Ron Reed. I am the former manager, the general manager of the Comedy Underground in Seattle, world famous Comedy Underground in Seattle. I was one of like 2 or 3 Jewish comedians in Seattle. And so there was an organization, I think it's Hadassah, which is a Jewish women's social organization. They do good works. And so a fundraiser, they wanted a comic for fundraiser. And I went to perform for their fundraiser. And after the show was over, one of the audience members came up to me and she said, "My nephew from Los Angeles is coming to stay with me for a little while. And he's really interested in comedy. And do you think you could help him out?" Coincidentally, I had lost my door person at the club. So I said, "Do you think he'd be interested in working at the comedy club?" And she said, "Oh, yes." I gave her my number and I said, "Have him call me." And he called me and I said, "You want to be my doorman?" And he said, "Oh, absolutely." And so he was my doorman at the Comedy Underground. And that's how I met Steve Brody, which of course is his name, and became Brody Stevens later on, and then at some point Stephen Brody Stevens. But he said, "My name is Steve Brody, but everybody just calls me Brody." That was in 1994.
My name is Teina Manu. I met Stephen James Brody, aka Brody Stevens, in the early part of the year, probably February of '94, and I had just started comedy myself that summer of '93. He had moved up from Los Angeles. He had taken some, not just comedy courses, like how to do comedy, but the business of comedy, how to book shows, all that kind of stuff from Sandy Shore. And Sandy had told him, LA's a bad place to start. You want to go somewhere else, a Denver, a Chicago, an Austin. Get started, get going, and then come back to LA. We have a little bit of an act. So he took that advice and had some uncles that lived in Seattle. One of them owned a big dry cleaning business there.
So there was a group of comics who started about the same time. So with him, Teina Manu, Josh Wolf, Joey Diaz, a guy named Gavin Boyd, who is a director, a filmmaker, and lives in Boise, Idaho now, but was in Los Angeles for a really long time. But he was a sort of a member of that cadre of comics.
My name is Josh Wolf. I met Brody in Seattle, I'm going to say 94. And we met at an open mic. And yeah, man, we loved our comedy.
It was a good group of like young people that all had jobs and apartments and cars. And so we could get to places. We could like do gigs. And at that time, Brody was a steady guy. He was waiting tables at like Red Robin. He had a Volvo that his mom gave him. And it was the first time I saw somebody with a cash card, like a credit card he'd use for gas that you didn't pay for. He'd always fill up. And it was because his mom gave him this card for gas. And I didn't know that still happened for someone in their 20s or 30s.
One of my favorite memories of Brody was with me and Brody, Gavin, and Joey Diaz. We're going to a one-nighter in Olympia. And Olympia was like 45 minutes, an hour from Seattle, maybe an hour. And the only car we had was Brody's. But we were leaving a little late. And Joey was like, get in the back, I'll drive. And Brody was like, we can't make it there. We're not going to make it there. And Joey's like, just get in the back, I'll drive. We're going to make it. Joe was going 60 down the one-way streets the wrong way, hopping curbs. Brody was losing his mind. And the best thing about Steve, like, sometimes you couldn't decide if he was really mad or fake mad or Brody mad. The fake outrage for the joke. But when he got out of the car in the parking lot, and we made it with like 3 minutes, Brody got out of the car and he slammed the door. And he screamed, "This is not how I live my life," which was like the perfect Brody crazy.
Pauly Shore's sister helped me with comedy. I know she was a personal tutor for me. We did our final class here at the Comedy Store, right? 1993. I did my first open mic in Chatsworth where that joke originates, when I did a solo scene on the yoga mat. I did my first because we did the show here in 93. I did my first show in Chatsworth. We went to Soup Plantation and Encino, and then we drove up to Chatsworth. When I started comedy, I went up to Seattle in 1994. I went by J. Brody Stevens.
Everett. That's by the Boeing plant. Yep. Arms crossed negative. You know, I lived in Seattle. You know, I worked at the original Red Robin in Seattle. You know that I learned to public speak selling T-shirts for the Seattle Supersonics in Seattle. This guy with the arms crossed. I read energy. I was there at my Red Robin years were 95, 96.
We were probably smoking pot together or something.
I didn't smoke pot then. I didn't smoke pot until I was 30. You gotta let your brain develop. You're smoking pot at 18, 19, you're done. You are done.
When he was in college at ASU, there was a woman that worked at a bunch of fast food restaurants around the college. Wendy's, like Burger King. Her hands, I don't know if it was a handicap, but they were like cramped. And so she would hand the trays over and she would always be happy. She'd go, "Here you go. Enjoy." And she'd always go, "Enjoy," like that. And then you go, "This lady's at Wendy's too." And same thing with her hands. She'd hand, "Enjoy," and hand the bag, "Enjoy." At the drive-thrus, he was almost fascinated by somebody who has some sort of disability and is working for minimum wage and is always happy and is always enjoy. And so he started saying that to friends in college. When I met him, we still say, "Enjoy it." And so that's what we became, "Enjoy it." From this, which really says a lot about his darkness and his angst, that maybe he wishes he could be, how do these people live these lives? And they're happy. This woman tells everybody, "Enjoy it. Enjoy." And yet she doesn't have the life. She's not rocking. She's making minimum wage. She's working in 2 or 3 different fast food joints, but still happy. And so he adopted that. Brody had all these, among the working class people, minimum wage workers, janitors. They're happy. They're fun. Enjoy it. Positivity. Even though I'm not feeling it, even though I can't tell you how to find it, it's still a good thing to be. Be positive. Be happy. Share the joy with other people.
It definitely was unfiltered, but in terms of what he said or did on stage, he was probably truer to himself than anybody I've seen.
He loved comedy. He loved performing. And wherever it was, you could ask Brody, there's an open mic over here and it's 50 miles away, but if you could show up, that would be really great. And he would do it.
He didn't have much experience. I knew that. You could see on stage, people say in show business about a comedian, he made the band laugh, right? So, watch the Tonight Show or Letterman, if the band leader was laughing, then that was like a good sign, things like that. So, in comedy, it's always like, if somebody's making the comics in the back of the room laugh, that is a sign of respect and admiration for what they're doing, whether it doesn't matter what the audience is doing or reacting to it. And so it's both a positive thing and a negative thing. The positive thing is, of course, is that you have the respect and admiration of your peers. And the negative thing is, boy, this guy, he's not connecting with these people at all. The comics would come and watch him, and they would stop what they were doing. If they were outside smoking or in a bar, they go, "Oh, Brody's on." And they would come and sit in the back of the room and watch him. And, again, a certain amount of that is respect and admiration. A certain amount of that is, here's a train wreck kind of thing.
I remember watching Brody used to try to tell jokes, right? He would eat shit and nobody bombed like Brody. He would get a little angry when he bombed. But I remember the first time seeing him snap. He was doing jokes and he was like, "Do you know how difficult this is?" He said, "First of all, do you know how hard it is for a single guy with a hairy back to shave his back by himself?" And he lifted up his shirt and he turned around to the crowd and he goes, "I've got trouble spots." And you could see there were just patches of hair that he clearly couldn't reach by himself.
So he's like kind of dark complected and dark hair, very thick, dark hair, thick eyebrows, heavy beard, one of those kind of shave twice a day kind of guys. So he had a joke about, he said, "Oh, I just got back from the Middle East. I was in the army." And people would applaud, because that's the applaud. And he would go, "In the Iraqi army." And people would boo, boo. I guess that was maybe something that he had come up with, in his comedy class. Self-deprecating humor, people see you, they see your appearance. So that's something that's obvious. So you comment on your appearance.
By the way, I may be one of the only people that still calls him Steve because that's how I met him. I met him as Steve Brody, I remember the day he changed his name. We were at the Comedy Underground and he bombed as only he can bomb. And he was bombed, man. And he was like, "Let me tell you who's not funny." I go, "Who's not funny?" He goes, "Steve Brody." I go, "Oh." I go, "You're pretty funny." He goes, "Nah," but he goes, "You know who's going to be funny?" I go, "Who?" He goes, "Brody Stevens." I go, "Who's that?" He said, "You'll see." And he showed up tomorrow, the person you knew.
When you watch somebody when they're brand new and they have an idea of what they're doing, a lot of them will do something like he was, wildly original, and then it sort of gets squeezed out of them later on. And they start going, "Well, I'm not making people laugh as much as I would like. So I'm going to change this. I'm going to change what I do. And I'm going to try and entertain the audience more." And so what happens is you see that spark of creativity go away. Then you see people where they're able to sort of keep that kind of wild originality and then yet make it palatable to a wide swath of the audience. But, he never cared to do that. I don't think. It didn't matter. I know he wanted to be liked. He wanted people to laugh at him. He wanted to be successful as a comedian, but he was always going to do it on his terms. He absolutely was one of a kind. And there was no duplication. You never watch him and go, "Oh, I heard somebody do that before." He had a plan, an idea. He wanted to express himself and he stuck with it 100% at all times. And of course, that's how you make art, right? Is that you bring something new into the world that didn't exist before. And I think that's what got the comedian's attention, initially.
He was doing alternative stuff, the clown character, he and Teina especially. They were the first of us that experimented and they unlocked it in each other. They'd been doing it a year, 2 years max. To have that sort of freedom to find your partner at that stage, that would have been like Will Ferrell finding Adam McKay a year in. For them to find each other at that stage and to match up like a puzzle and fill in the spots, which is what they did for each other. To be that brave and experimental, that's what was always amazing to me. You couldn't say one's name without the other. He was that pivotal in Brody's life, without a doubt. And Brody in his. It was pretty fascinating to watch. I remember watching them on stage and thinking, I could never. I can't believe they're putting themselves out there like that. And they did. I don't even know if envious is the right word. I was so impressed by both of them and how free they felt on stage. That was not something that I came to feel until way, way, way later. But they brought it out in each other. And so Brody wasn't doing any of the drumsticks or the tambourines yet, but he was definitely starting to try shit. I remember he brought a homeless clown on stage one night. He brings this guy on stage and he's like, hey, everybody, this is in a dirty clown suit and just filthy. He was the homeless clown we had seen in Pioneer Square a million times. Brody brings him on stage for his, come on, everybody, this is his dream. Well, the dude was mentally ill. And at one point, Brody needed him to wrap it up. And it started to get a little dark because people weren't laughing. Brody tried to wrap it up and he put his hand on him. And the guy said, you touch me again and I'll murder every fucking person in this room. And we were all like, okay, well, it was pretty crazy.
Did I tell you I was lonely? Forget that. Sometimes I go down to the batting cage just to play catch.
I parked for free. Did you? With my 1996 Toyota Avalon. Leather exterior. Cruise control in reverse. Very hairy as a child. Growing up, most kids in my neighborhood had Flintstone vitamins. Somehow I had Rogaine chewables. Super old joke. I'm intense, man. I get BO in the shower. I get road rage at the car wash. I get real. And I have fetishes. Yes, I'm into amputation. I know it would shock you. I am aroused by amputation. In fact, I took my infatuation for amputation to another level. True story. Recently, I hooked up with an amputee. I met her on StubHub. And come on, you like that one. Come on, it's StubHub. Nobody gets hurt. She waived the handling fees. Come on.
We thought that comedy should have almost a circus element, almost like a wrestling vibe, to where there are heroes and foils, but they're both in on it. When we started the cable access show, that was definitely why we got along. And all the other comedians were like, what are you guys doing? This is like dumb. It's not really, it's silly. It's like goofy. It's not real comedy.
Seattle, and I think a lot of cities at the time, had public access television. So this was independently run, but there was its full-on studio with gear. What they did was they would offer classes. So you could take a class, and if you took a certain amount of classes, like a camera hobby, you could, there was a class about directing a television show. So you got to work with the board and calling shots and switching cameras. And then you took a camera operator class. So you were familiar with what you were asking the camera operators. It was all volunteers.
Brody had a little show going. He had a couple little shows where he knew about it. I found out about it, took the class to learn all the equipment. And we started doing this show where we thought it should be really funny, sort of suggestive, a little bit raunchy, but no nudity, no cussing was our whole thing. Except we would go to the porno conventions at the time in Vegas and just shaking asses and like that. But we'd always tell the viewers like, yeah, there's no nudity. Don't even say there's nudity. We did not do nudity. And so we'd say fudge and frick and stuff like that.
I think a lot of people watched this channel for the train wreck aspect of amateurs making television. It wasn't completely uncensored, but it was mostly uncensored.
It was either the Brody and Teina show or the Teina and Brody show, because each person got one show. That's all you could have. So because we both wanted to keep this show up, I had a show and he had a show, and all we had to do was flip the names, and they allowed us to do it. So Brody and Teina was on Thursday. Teina and Brody was on Saturday. And so it was the same exact show, but that little wordplay, they let us do it. The theme of the show was that everyone deserves to be listened to, even if you want to disagree with them and hate them. The idea of not having certain voices included, to us, we thought was like anti-freedom, anti-intellectual, anti-comedy.
I believe there's an episode asking a homeless woman what it would take for a hand job. $20, sandwich. What's your line? They aired it.
We'd film streets of Seattle, homeless people, Pioneer Square, and all this. And then people would also get very upset at filming the homeless people. We would have them do competitions and stuff, a handful of change. Okay, this is 84 cents. If you can pick this up in 84 seconds, you can keep it. And we just toss it in the air and it would just sprinkle on the parking lot. And the guy would rush around and pick it all up. And we 79, 78, 77. He's almost there. There's a penny over there. 70. And people were just like outraged that we would do this. And our thing was, we're interacting with people, with everybody, and having fun and explaining to them, we have a cable access show. Would you mind picking up this change? It's for a goof. And they always loved it. They always loved engaging. They almost felt like, God, somebody's talking to me. Yes, I'll do it. Yes, fuck, I'm so bored here. I'm in my box. This is fun.
There was a transgender comedian named Rita O. They were relentless to Rita O. Relentless.
We had trans people on. Some of the first trans comedians that were around, this woman named Rita O, would come on the show. That was a blast. Brody asking, like, what'd you do with the extra parts? Did you make a wallet?
And it just is up to the other people how they're going to receive it. I never thought of Teina or Steve to be hateful people. They wanted to do jokes that made people go, oh. So I think intent is important when it comes to stuff like this. And for them, the intent was just to be silly and goofy and funny.
It was like wrestling. That was very hard to get across to people. It was just noise and color for people. It's why we always started the shows with a dance number and music, because when people were flipping the channel at every half-hour mark, we wanted them to go, what's this? Two big faces in the screens, these guys jumping in and out, no shirts on or some kind of mask or whatever. It was all just like to get attention for people to, oh, what's this? Let's stop. The cable access show, that room was just like a closet. They call them hotline studios. And all they were used for is just one or two people would sit in front of a curtain and just talk about some political issue they had. It was just a public forum. But for us, we were like, this is live television. Who cares if it's a little room with a couple of cameras? We could make it into a show, we thought. And so we put the background up. I took a mop handle from the janitor's closet and we duct taped it to one of the cameras so we could move that camera. We could swivel that to like camera 1, camera 2, and to put some motion in the studio to make it into something more. We wanted the background to be a certain way. We would write bits. We would show up to the studio to put all of the scrolls and all the text that would go out had to be pre-written on a hard drive sometime during the week at the studio. Based on the old talk shows, you have the monologue. That always happens. You have some little sketch, like the Johnny Carson show, that always happens. We try to give people something recognizable and something regular. If they watched our show, they could expect something that we were always going to do. We'd always go to a clip. We really thought we were doing TV. We took it that seriously. And you could call in the show live. We'd put the number on the screen. Landlines. You'd call in and you're watching your television and somebody would pick up the phone on TV. It's like his old telethon days. And they loved it. And we'd hear a whole room go crazy. It was like before podcasting. And so other people, after seeing us do that, that's what those rooms became. We transformed them into little mini studios from just a talking room. It sort of took over our lives. And so we became very close. And from about 95 to 97, we did that show.
They got kind of a cult following.
As we did the show over a year or two, the kids really loved it. High school, college age. Pagliacci pizzas and the Dick's Burgers and things. It was all free for us. We would go to places and we go, yeah, get a double cheese. And they go, here you go. And they would just hand it to us. What? How much does it cost? No, it's on us. And all the guys back in the Friars and stuff would be waving and clapping like, we love your show.
So people did come to see them. And I see them because, it was a 2-person show, but people did come to see them live because of the TV show.
We did, I think 180, just almost 200 live episodes together.
If you look at early Brody and Teina, their cable access show, they did some things. Canceled isn't even the right word. What would happen to them? Like buried, like shipped off the planet.
Brody and I were watching, a few years ago, we were watching some of the old clips. We were cracking up, but there's so many things we're like, oh my God, the pedophile jokes. It was just like cancer. I can't wait to get cancer. What kind of cancer would you like? I go, I'd love, and we would discuss what's a good cancer to have and then how we'd milk it. I go, can you get cancer in your hair? Like, I don't know. I feel like that would be a good one. And it's just awful. I mean, stuff that just, oh my God, it would just be torches and pitchforks nowadays if we did that stuff.
Most of Brody's experimental stuff in Seattle either happened on that show with Teina or at Ron's club at the Comedy Underground. That's where we felt our freest. Ron and a guy named Carl, they let us do whatever the fuck we wanted. To be that young of a comic and to be that experimental, even now, knowing what I know now, is so mind-blowing to me.
They were very funny. I mean, both very funny. Then the other thing they did was there was a comedy night in a pizza joint that it wound up becoming their night. They took it over from I guess whoever was booking it just decided they didn't want to do it anymore. So not only do they have open mic night at the Comedy Underground, but then they had this television show, Brody and Teina, and then they also had this Romeo's Pizza.
He was a fixture on the local sports talk morning shows because he knew sports. And so he'd call in and do jokes, and also worked at the Sonics team store at the time.
When we were younger, we connect a lot on baseball. I played college baseball also. And just our drive to want to be comics. We both loved both baseball and comedy. Loved. And could sit and talk about it, either one with each other ad nauseum. And, we used to go to the Hurricane Cafe, which is up in Seattle, after the open mics. And just, we could afford a pot of coffee and just talk about jokes and talk about comedy and talk about baseball.
He was a baseball player, and he'd been going to Arizona State University, and he was a prospect, and he injured his shoulder. And so his career was kind of over as a baseball player.
There is that high pressure of being the pitcher. And so that's who Brody was. He wasn't just a participant. He was the guy carrying the weight of this entire game. And if he's good enough, they're going to win. And he took that into comedy. And he took that into like, I'm the pitcher. You guys need a fastball right now? I'll bring it. And he was also a relief pitcher, 2 college World Series at ASU. The baseball culture is very manly. It's very stop crying, walk it off. Don't be a baby. When you see the coach, and he was a pitcher. So he wasn't just a player. The pitcher takes on the entire weight of the game.
Also in the 90s, mental health was jokes. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you had said, hey, I'm a little fucking off, people would have been like, that. Nobody would have taken it too seriously, unfortunately.
He would tell me, I don't feel right. Because I would say like, well, just, we're Polynesian, so it's walk it off. What are you talking about? Go hug a kid, go walk your dog, take a nap. You know what I mean? You find some way to be happy. Man, we don't do that. We go to therapists. They tell us what to do. And so he started on, I think, Luvox. That's right. There's so many names. That was his first one.
I remember when we were moving to LA and he decided on New York. I think he wanted to go somewhere where he didn't know anybody. It was a big sense of what I got. He wanted like different and to find himself. And the West Coast would have been home and a little more comfortable. And so I was really impressed with him moving to New York and the work he put in. that dude was a tireless worker, but I think he wanted to just challenge himself in a different way. Joey and I were moving to LA, and that was not what he decided to do.
My family's from the desert southwest. New Mexico. The hills high above. The cliffs high above Arizona. We were artists. We were into turquoise.
Born Jewish, raised Gemini. I read energy. I was supposed to be bar mitzvahed. I wasn't. I had a lot of money coming to me. But the Persian kids, Hachi and Udi, they stole my yarmulke. It was a new era fitted yarmulke, 7 3/8 from Lids. They stole it. Look at me. I got picked on. I got picked on growing up on that prison yard, locked up raw. I'm from Reseda. I fought a Crip in 87. You want to get real? Fought a Crip. Yeah, I pulled her hair. Yanked it. 818 till I die. You got it. You don't get it, you're wrong. It's that simple. I've been to a youth hostel. I used to live at a youth hostel. I caught my roommate masturbating. It happens, right? I caught my roommate masturbating. He fell out of the bunk bed directly into my arms. And we laughed. That's a dark... You don't walk out on that. That's a classic new bit.
Over the next 3 years in New York City, Brody went from doing open mics in Starbucks to barking at the famed Comedy Cellar. He became a fixture in the downtown scene at Surf Reality, The Collective Unconscious, and Luna Lounge, where comics like Patton Oswalt and Zach Galifianakis were already well known. He named his rant-filled Monday night Flatiron District show at Eureka Joe's Coffee House the Festival of Laughter.
My name is Teina Manu. He just wanted to go to New York for a while. It's something he always wanted to try to do, see what it was like. Probably 97. He stayed in a hostel for a while. Then he got that apartment in Bushwick, off Bushwick Avenue, actually. And his apartment was so shitty. I couldn't believe people lived like this. The shower was not even a shower. It was like a box next to the kitchen. It was like a shower stall with two different knobs. You know, one was like 4-handle knob, and the other one was just a handle. It was like hose bibs. It was like a pipe. It was just, I couldn't believe people lived like this. That's when he was working at Radio City Music Hall, and he would give the tours there. And so he took me there just to go behind stage and all this stuff and show me Radio City. And then he started doing all the, he did a lot of barking. Caroline's, I think. We have some great pictures together backstage at the UCB.
My name's Jeff Ross. I first met Brody in the 90s in the Lower East Side of New York City. We were both part of the alt comedy scene.
And that's where he met Zach, Sarah Silverman, some of the New York people that were around that ended up coming to LA.
I did not like Brody when I met him. He really rubbed me the wrong way. Back in our early days of stand-up back in New York, Brody was sort of a nuisance. I was working on a one-man show about my grandfather, and it was very emotional for me, and it was a creative stretch for me, and I'd never done anything dramatic before. And I had my baby book that my mom wrote, when I was a baby, and, she's since passed on, and I'm holding this sacred thing in my hand, and I'm telling stories about the losses I've had in my life. And Brody, every time I ran the show in this little 50-person room, Surf Reality it was called, on the Lower East Side, Brody would be in the audience. And he would distract me. He'd always sit in the front. I don't know if he was obsessed with the show or me or what was going on, or he just had nothing better to do, but he would just sort of laugh in awkward places and sort of wiggle around, and it distracted me. I remember saying, Brody, a big shot from HBO is coming to look at my show to maybe take me to the comedy festival. Can you just not come to this performance of mine? He said, oh, okay. And I get on stage, I walk out, it's a black box room, and There's one giant person right in the front, and it's Brody. I can't stop the performance. So I just have to do the whole show distracted. And he's fidgeting around and this and that. Maybe I asked him not to sit in the front, and of course he sat in the front, telling me later that that was the only available seat. So stand, Lurch. I remember afterwards exploding on him. You know, my own version of exploding, which is probably some passive-aggressive, like, dude, you know, you got nothing better to do? He just talked his way around it and said that he wanted to see the show again, and you couldn't hate him, but I found him to be this weird extra in my life. I didn't know him. I didn't even know his name at that point. But he was just this big, weird distraction. And every time I'd see him, he'd bring it up so we could never get past it. He'd be like, oh, hey, it's me, Brody Stevens, the guy that you find annoying. Just so I could be on a date, I could be with my agent, it didn't matter. Brody would always bring up that worst, terrible moment that we had. So it really is a credit to life in that we stayed friends.
I played sports. I went to Arizona State University. I played baseball. Boom. I was a pitcher. I'm wearing a jock strap right now. It's a youth medium. I got it playing against sports. Not a bad crowd.
Where are you from? You're from where? Where did I play baseball in 1989? I played for the North Pole Knicks. Thank you. Outside Fairbanks. So I pitched in Fairbanks. I hacked weeds off the US 2 highway. And we played Anchorage Bucks.
Brody returned to Los Angeles in 2000. At a 2001 baseball game during the Chicago Comedy Festival, he hung out with Zach Galifianakis, and soon, back in LA as well. Brody's baseball background proved instrumental in landing a TV warm-up gig of a lifetime, with similar opportunities to follow.
My name is Ron Reed. He went from Seattle to New York and then back to Los Angeles.
My name's Dave Rath. I'm a comedy manager, and I managed my friend Brody Stevens off and on for about 20 years. And he was easily the most unique comedian and person I've ever known. He was Zach's muse. I was a friend of Zach's. We had like an alt scene in the mid-'90s in L.A. that was really burgeoning. And Brody showed up one day. I think it was at UCB at a stand-up show. Zach's like, meet me down there. And he was on, and we watched him. We hung out after, and he was Brody. He was already formed. We did so many road trips. I went to Cooperstown with him, and a lot of baseball, a lot of games here and there.
He had lived in Arizona because he'd gone to ASU. He'd go to spring training, and you know, he knew all the guys because he either played with them or against them in college. And so he knew them. Everybody knew him. And so he got to sort of participate. They would go, hey, catch me. He just would post something and he'd go, I can still throw 80. I don't know if you've ever seen 80 miles an hour. Now, for a major league pitcher, that's like a slow pitch. But for normal human beings, if you have a hard ball coming at you 80 miles an hour, that's crazy to see.
My name is Josh Wolf, a great athlete and a strong fucking guy. Like a strong human, big dude.
He could throw even with his injured shoulder, and even of years doing comedy and doing that, he could still pitch. He could still throw a baseball. And he was welcome sort of everywhere in spring training because, you know, again, the guys he played in the Pac, what was the Pac-10 at the time, Pac-12 conference now, guys he played with and guys he played against, a lot of them were in professional baseball. And so they maintained their relationship and their friendships. And so he was always welcome at spring training.
He's always been peculiar and odd, and he knew it, and he talked about it. And for him, baseball became his anchor to normalcy, I think, to feeling wanted and included. And he was good. You know, he could throw the ball, and he had a shot. And he got hurt in college, and I think that really devastated him for a period of time. And I think he just redirected that same energy, that same kind of focus and discipline and all the principles that you learn being an athlete at that level in college baseball in a competitive division, pitching against future major leaguers, and really, you know, had the ability, knew he did. And then to lose it had to be devastating.
I'm the hardest throwing comedian in Hollywood. When I lived in Arizona for a while, he took me to spring training a few times. I remember the Cubs spring training thing, and there was like Sammy Sosa was playing still for them at the time. And so he gave me this camera. There was something being filmed there, but it wasn't like official. So he's like, just hold the camera, but it's not on. But just like follow me around, and they'll think that I'm doing something for this. So we went everywhere, went all up and down, and nothing was being filmed. But I got to meet all the players and see their locker and how they set up. I saw Sammy Sosa putting on his socks.
So I was there at the World Series. I was at the clinching games. My friend who I grew up with in the San Fernando Valley, 818 till we die, is a coach for the Chicago Cubs. He coaches this team. So he said, Brody, come to Chicago. I've been hanging out with the Cubs for 5 years. He's been a coach for 5 years. I go to Chicago when I'm requested. I go to Arizona for spring training. I go to Dodger Stadium. I go to San Francisco. I put my time in. Where were you, Vince Vaughn?
I'm Howard Kremer. The world of baseball was pretty harsh. Those guys would make fun of him, and there was like anti-Semitism and stuff too. So I think he just came from that underdog. Even the way he championed the Valley over this side of the hill, you know, it was just very much sticking up for the little guy and the blue-collar Valley ideal.
I coached my son's teams, and we talked a lot about baseball. He came out to my son's baseball team and helped me with the pitchers. It was a ton of fun.
Brody was also very much about craft, because in baseball, either you can throw 100 or you can't. There's no nuance. You either have to have the mechanics, you have to train, or you can't do it. And so we both believed that comedy does have rules. You know, it does have a structure, word choice, rhythm, timing.
Transfer the energy from baseball to comedy, and he applied the same discipline, which helped him.
He would just walk in the room and just start telling you, feeling pretty good, shoulders a little tight. Like, you know, he came from the sports world and being a pitcher. It seemed to me like the kind of stuff that coaches would care about, because they've got you on a 3-day rotation as a pitcher and they need to know how you're doing all the time. But he would just walk into a room full of self-involved, self-centered stand-up comics, and everything would stop for, you know, that update, that report on how he's doing.
When you're trying to keep structure, you're trying to keep control, because somewhere inside of you, there isn't any control. So it makes sense to me that he would have like the mental checklist like that, just to kind of be like, yep, got that, got that, got that. He had to get his reps in, man. Why a grown human male is throwing batting practice, throwing like just warm-ups, pitching, knowing he's never going to pitch ever, right? Ever. But to be out there long tossing and just getting his form down against a fence at 40, do you know what I mean? He loved baseball. He loved throwing the ball. And that's the same thing with comedy. He loved it.
When he went back to Los Angeles, one of the first gigs he got was doing warm-up for a sports talk show.
Because he was an athlete and he had known some athletes. He had started doing some stuff on the sports side, radio and a few other things. And that got him to the Best Damn Sports Show, which got him to do warm-up, which created, 7 or 8, 9 years of warm-up work on various shows.
Rich Eisen, Best Damn Sports Show. It was a good gig because they're a paycheck, and they're a television paycheck as opposed to $15 spot at a club somewhere. Of course, he knew everything about sports, particularly baseball, but all sports. He just a fan, total sports guy.
At Best Damn Sports Show, he would meet a lot of athletes that came in to be guests, and he would take pictures with them. And then you'd go to his house or even on the road. I mean, one time in Vancouver, he just started pulling out all these laminates that he took, and it's just to show you and, their credentials. So, here's me with Deion Sanders and here's me with Michael Strahan. But all those guys liked him. We'd run into those guys. Hey, Brody, how you doing?
I would go with him to Best Damn Sports Show, and we would do little characters. So one time I was The Rock's cousin, because I was like half Samoan. And so he was like in between the commercial breaks. Hey, let's bring up The Rock, Dwayne Johnson's cousin, so-and-so is here. And they'd bring me up. You guys want a Q&A with Rock's, people are like, oh my God, what's it like to work with The Rock? I go, oh, he's a cool guy. How do you know? He's my uncle.
I don't know whether warmed up or worked up would be the correct thing, but he would just work them and just like sweat. He'd be sweating and just working it, working the crowd. And sometimes people laughed and sometimes they didn't. He inevitably made the comedians laugh. He inevitably made the industry laugh because agents and managers and casting people and producers were drawn to him because they were drawn to originality.
Guys, let's get this thing going. You're holding back. I need your energy. Let's finish this strong. What else you got going on tonight? Nothing. Let's go hard. Push it.
He started doing a lot of warm-up, which was great for him. The Man Show, Comedy Central. Late World with Zach was a bunch of our friends that were the writers and performers. I think he did warm-up, but I think he did some stuff on camera too, and Zach was trying to figure out how to share him with the world because he was so amused by him.
My name is Don Barris. I first met Brody, I can't even give a year, but the way I met him was I was doing audience warm-up, and he would come up and he acted like he knew me. Don Barris, and he'd know all these things that I had done, and I had no idea who he was. I eventually lost a job to him because one day he was in the audience getting paid as an audience member, and then I lost my job, and he was doing the audience warm-up because I came in to get something, and I saw him doing the audience warm-up. Good to see you, Don. Jillian Barbary was the host of this show. One time she came up and she put her hand and put her fingers in the crack of my ass and grabbed hard. I thought, oh, well, that's at least good. I'm not going to lose this job. She doesn't dislike me. But then a few weeks later, I was gone, and there was Brody taking over, picking up the pieces. I was very lucky that I got Jimmy Kimmel Live. His shows are over in an hour. And some of these shows, they're like a 6-hour thing.
Barris and Brody were similar in their styles. Let's put it that way. But Brody was intense.
All it is being willing to go up in front of a group of people and say, okay, here's what we're doing next. Oh, what are you doing? And you got to get their energy up. And he'd start clapping like a maniac. But that's what you got to do. It's just having people awake. Anytime anyone ever offered me a job, because I had a job, I'd always give it to him. I'd always, please call him.
That's why he made such a great warm-up. There's like half homeless people in these crowds. There's like professional audience people that get like $50 to sit and clap. And he would still try to get them going, still try to give them something special and fun, even though you're just tired in this crowd, So he had horns and he had all the tambourines and stuff. He would dance around, or he would do push-ups in front of the people, or do like high leg kicks.
He would get that cowbell out. And if you were not giving him the energy he wanted, he would ping, 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 that cowbell right in front of your fucking face. Arms crossed, negative energy. Arms crossed, negative. He would shame you into having a good time.
Pumping it up. Let's go. Come on, one more time. By the end of whatever he did, people are just cheering. They had the greatest time. And he'd get off stage, and I remember thinking, like, God, they have no idea who this guy is, how dark he is, how sad he is, how alone he is. And because of what he just gave them.
I used to be, when I first started, one of these guys that if you weren't laughing, I would kind of lose my mind, and I would call them out. But I learned not to do that. But I think I understand that Brody was exactly the same way with this. I'm putting myself out there because I want you to love me. And if they didn't love him, I think it really stung him.
His warm-up, a lot like his stand-up. he would crush, or the audience would be like, should we be laughing right now? Like, what the?
So there's a lot of paid audience members in these crowds. And when they're kids automatically go after something. So they would go to Brody and they would pick on Brody immediately. And a lot of times he would tell me stories about him waiting in the parking lot for audience members to come out. So I think that he got in a lot of disagreements with people.
He would take it personally. If he didn't have a crowd focused, he would lash out at them.
Brody, like most comics, was very sensitive, but he wore his Achilles heel and everybody would see it. Don't like my nose? What's wrong with my nose? And he'd argue with people, which in a way I thought was brilliant if that was his plan. But I think it was a lot of times you were seeing the real Brody just very hurt by something someone had said. And I do think doing audience warm-up is a thankless job because it's usually a friend of the producers and they will fire you at the drop of a hat. And Brody went through a little of that, and that's tough.
My name is Chelsea Handler, and I spent the majority of my time with Brody at my talk show, Chelsea Lately, because he warmed up the audience for us. He had a delivery and a presence that was very unique. He basically yelled and made declarations about the Van Nuys flyover, about random places of shopping. And he had a delivery that stood out from other comics for sure, because he also would bomb a lot. That was kind of part of his shtick. You had to kind of know Brody to love him and adore him. And people always ended up loving and adoring him. But if he went up in front of an audience that wasn't familiar with him, it was more shocking than anything else.
As comics, we loved it. I could sit at that panel and watch him. I like a train wreck. I like it when I'd be like, what the fuck? Does he have that cowbell an inch away from that dude's face? Fling, ding, 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 you know? But Chelsea understood him and loved him and let him be him.
We would always be in the control room when he was warming up the audience, and we would watch him, like all the directors and all the sound and everybody who's in a control room, which is usually like 10 or 12 people for a live show. We would always just turn the sound on while he was warming up the crowd because it was so funny. He would offer up a trip to Universal Studios because we were on the lot of Universal, but I don't even think we had access to the Universal Studios. Our audience certainly didn't. He would offer up free lunches. He would offer up just random things that would never have to come to fruition. By the time people left, they had forgotten they even won something. He became famous for being our warm-up person because people would come back multiple times to tapings.
Once you got to know him, you found him endearing, and he was just part of the comedy scene. What other industries are going to accept a guy who's, dressed for baseball, but doing comedy and loud and obnoxious and inappropriate and most of all, funny?
You definitely didn't forget him.
We eventually became friends, and I admired him enough where when I finally got a big break on TV to do my own Comedy Central show called The Burn, I couldn't imagine doing it without Brody. I wanted Brody to warm up the crowd, make the audience hot. We had long hours in the writer's room preparing. It's a weekly show, a lot of pressure, first season. When Brody showed up, that was a sign that it was show day because Brody worked with the live audience that came in for the taping. So Brody kind of broke up the week for us. When Brody visited, it was like, oh, okay, the party's starting. This is when we start to put our computers to sleep and put the jokes up on their feet. And we would start pitching jokes out, and Brody would be in there laughing with us and watching us make notes. He was really there for moral support and sort of a break in the action. He was just somebody we were happy to see. It got to a point where we had such good chemistry that he would introduce me, and we had little bits we worked out where I called him the Eagle from the Muppet Show, which I think became part of his act eventually, and we had a real rapport, and I could set him up for his jokes, and he could set me up for mine. And by the time we got done with our little banter, that crowd was ready for a TV taping. We were in it. He was undeniably great at that. And not only that, when someone canceled, Brody would step from behind the scenes into the spotlight, and he appeared on the show and was fantastic. It was a very highly rated episode when Brody was on the show.
He loved the sort of working class. His Twitter was like, Brody is me friend. And it was from when he was warming up. I went with him to all these, like Anthony Jeselnik and Ridiculousness and Chelsea, The Burn, and all these workers, the guy mopping the floors and stuff and cleaning up. He'd love to be cool with them, and fist bump him and stuff. Like, Manuel, there he is. Yes, clean floors. We need them. And he'd go, hey, Brody's my friend. Brody's my friend. And they would say that. So that became his Twitter thing. He called himself Brody is my friend from those.
He used a lot of energy, so that's what warm-up needed. So he perfected that skill. So anyone in our circle of friends or comedy would hear about him. I'd get calls from him all the time. It's like, hey, is he available? And then it's like, what's the show? We better be careful because it has to be the right thing. He wasn't a warm-up necessarily for a sitcom, which he got calls for, but I never put him into because I knew it would backfire because that's not a different job. For him, it was the concept comedy shows, getting an audience hyped, understanding what's going on, keeping the proceedings moving, making sure they're up and energized and noisy throughout the show at midnight. And some of those shows later were paid audiences. So they weren't even there of their own volition necessarily. They were dragged there or they're getting paid to be there. So it's extra challenging. But Chelsea was the big break, and that was the one that he did for a long time, and they were good friends. And he was good for that audience, too, because they were fans of hers, which means they're going to like snark and they're going to be a little tougher and they're going to be there to laugh. So it was a good match for Brody until it wasn't. There would be multiple events or examples of him getting frustrated with the audience and it kind of turning and it being very obvious. He was burning out on it, I think, is what was happening. He needed to do other stuff and something we were trying to do.
I've done 3,000 television audience warm-ups. I created Chelsea lately. I created shows on Fox Sports. I've known Chelsea Handler for 15 years. She's known me for 2. Crowd. I take apple cider vinegar. I wear magnets. I've got the cool hat. I went to that Gorn Brothers store. Okay? I have style. I have confidence. I take supplements.
I take MSM. I take BioSil. I take apple cider vinegar. I take calcium. I take Bone Up. My teeth are strong. I take a good multi. I take reds and greens. I hang out in the vitamin shop. How important are vitamins?
Not very.
Not very. Okay, thank you.
Brody's comedy persona was uniquely his alone. Appearing in 2009 blockbuster The Hangover proved a confidence booster. Zach Galifianakis soon executive produced the starring vehicle Enjoy It. The comedy/reality series captured a pivotal time in Brody's life, for better and for worse.
I'm Howard Kremer. I first met Brody doing stand-up, I guess, in the late turn of the century. Just doing stand-up in L.A. We started doing shows at the same kind of places that were available to guys that were at our level. M-Bar on Fountain and Vine. And then when that moved to UCB on Franklin.
I'm Esther Povitsky, and I first met Brody at the Comedy Store in 2009. He was actually not around as much when I first got there. I heard about him for the first few months because I was dancing in this late night lip-syncing rock band show run by Don Barris called the BKO, the Barris Kennedy Overdrive.
My name is Don Barris. Originally, it was the Barris Brody Overdrive. He would drum, and I was the lead singer. Then I realized what's funny about this, what can be funny, is to fight amongst each other, because that's what I did with him. And he was just so sensitive. So I said, I'm leaving the band. I'm going to start my own band.
Everyone would always talk about, well, when Brody's here, he does the drums, but Brody's away. And I just was like, who is this Brody guy? Everyone's like obsessed with him and he's like into sports. And then he finally came around and I was like, what is this? Like, this guy is so weird and unlike anyone I've ever met.
He wasn't allowed to come on during our band, but he would sit in the audience and play chair drums from the audience. And it was just ridiculous.
My name's Jeff Ross. He'd bring 2 drumsticks and just bang them on the chairs at the club and just get everybody's blood pumping. If you wanted to get your yayas out late at night, you'd go watch Brody, close up the main room at the Comedy Store, and he held his own private rock concert.
My name is Teina Manu. Playing the drums and doing all that stuff, he felt like, at least you could like this. At least somebody can take something from my show. I'm obviously trying to entertain you.
My name is Josh Wolf. He would walk around in the audience. He would just recite facts, scream out what school you went to. I'll tell you the mascot.
My name's Dave Rath. He had a special gift for encyclopedic knowledge of weird shit and weird things. Like he could be in the middle of Minnesota and go, what high school did you go to? And he'll know the mascot. He'll know a famous person that went there. It's just weird shit like that. And then he would call it connections. And then somebody like Don Barris would walk in and interrupt the proceedings and would go haywire and become worldwide wrestling in the main room at the Comedy Store at 2 a.m.
He was just doing stand-up in a way that nobody else was doing it, in sort of this unfathomable way that's tough to describe, but if you've seen it, it kind of just sticks in your mind. I mean, there were sets where he would just walk out and turn his back to the audience and just start doing calf raises. And it was enthralling. It was as good as, saying a great joke to open a set. And it was just like little touches like that, and then starting to talk to him and get to know him off stage and realize like, oh, this isn't just all bit. This isn't all character. Wow, he's a lot like this in real life. Like he might go off on a bit where he's talking about his vitamins or something like that. He'd just do 20 minutes about all the vitamins he uses and start to interview the audience about it.
Kettlebells, fiber.
Do I take C and A at the same time? Yes. And so we just turned it into this interrogation, even though it was all about him. But then, we would do festivals and stuff where I'd wind up in his hotel room and he'd wind up pulling out all the vitamins and just telling me all about it.
He was an anti-punchline guy. He almost worked backwards. He made you laugh at facts. When he got you in his rhythm and he told you what his GPA was at Arizona State and you laughed, that's a genius at work. He's got you in his rhythm. He's making you laugh at just how he says apple cider vinegar. He was anti-comedy, but he was also the most comedy. In one sense, I guess he was like not stand-up comedy, but in the true sense for me, which is your job is to make the people in front of you laugh, no matter how you do that. That's your job. That's what you've been paid to do. He was the best example of that because he wasn't writing set of punchlines, but he was figuring out how to make his GPA funny.
Brody had this incredible persona where he could kill, he could bomb, but he was still funny bombing. To me, I think in a way he might bomb on purpose because he knew that those savers, were funnier than his acts sometimes, or as funny.
And it was always must-see viewing. I didn't skip many of his sets. If I was on the same show with him or on tour or whatever, I mostly saw all of them. It was just like, wow, Brody's going to do a set. And I've heard every joke, but I still want to watch every joke. And I would watch him like a fan. You would forget that you're a stand-up, and he was just like one of those guys that every comic wanted to watch.
You know, if comedy was a high school, he'd be the kid that got along with everyone and was accepted by everyone and could sit at any single table. It's very rare that someone is so loved in the clubs and then also on the alt scene.
He always talked to everybody, open micers, anybody.
He was the kind of, in a way, the ultimate alt comic in terms of everything he did.
And the alt scene literally worshipped Brody. And I can't think of anyone else at the Comedy Store who the alt scene welcomed with open arms. It was just Brody.
He wasn't trying to walk the room. He was not trying to pull a trick on them. He was trying to make them laugh, but in his way. He wanted the acceptance, maybe worse than any of us.
He was sort of in this fight to prove that he belonged in show business, you know, and he liked to talk about that struggle. So every one of those things, like the stuff with Zach and the stuff with The Hangover, it was just all sort of like, I swipe onto the Fox lot, you know, just these different things that he would turn into credentials. They were all important to him. It was all like, you know, he's always building towards, I need to get a Prius, I need to have a condo in the valley, a little bit of money, and then I'm going to get a girl. And all those little steps were going to get him to that Shangri-La.
You were asleep, okay? He slept through the number one R-rated comedy of all time. I was in Hangover 1. I was in Hangover 2. I was cut out of the movie Funny People. Hurt my feelings. Thanks, Judd Apatow. You saw The Hangover, the three main guys. They stole a police car, and they drove it on the sidewalk, and they got arrested. So then they got brought to the police station. And they're handcuffed to a bench in a police station. And I walk in giving kids a tour. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Officer Foltz, and this is The Hangover. Background, speeding, lights, sound, action. So after we take their mug shots, we bring them on down here where they wait to be interviewed by the arresting officers. Trust me, kids, you don't want to be sitting on these benches. We call this place Loserville.
You know, him and Zach would make fun of each other at the old Largo. They would heckle each other, and Zach would make fun of his nose, and Brody would get indignant, fake indignant. How dare you? And then when Zach ascended, he looked for a place to use Brody to bring that magic with him.
Well, The Hangover Part 1, The Hangover Part 2, cut out of Funny People. Due date.
Every single person that would have gotten any of those gigs would be shouting to the moon, telling everybody. Brody wasn't ashamed to admit it. This is what we're trying to do here in LA. I was in The Hangover. Like, that's an amazing achievement. He would say the number one R-rated comedy of all time before Ted.
Well, it was everything, obviously, in that kind of a movie and that opportunity to go to Thailand. And it was Zach just doing like a lot of people do. They put their friends in their projects. In this case, completely warranted.
Zach Galifianakis really recognized that he was always the perfect victim because he always set him up so beautifully when he had him play that banana. He was ridiculous, but he knew how to use him. I think he really saw why Brody was funny.
Zach got a deal or got an opportunity to do a show at HBO, which turned into Enjoy It on Comedy Central later.
Enjoy It. The series was Zach, and it got to HBO Go, and it was a series of like 6 little mini episodes.
He had Chelsea thing happen, and we were also shooting the Enjoy It thing for HBO with Zach. And so we did 6 episodes, and it was, here's Zach's muse. He's kind of funny and interesting, and we're going to go on and do things with him. And then obviously, then this all happened in the middle of that.
He was doing warm up at Chelsea, but him on the panel, she let him be him, man. He was fucking so himself on that panel, and she would ridicule him, and that's part of the deal. And he would pretend to be outrageous. That's part of his deal. The faux outrage by Brody was some of the best. But I really felt like for a couple of years there, he was really in the pocket.
My name is Chelsea Handler. You would think that that was a character on stage, but off stage, he was also very similar. It was very hard to get to know Brody, to really have a deep conversation with him, because he just kind of always had this, I don't want to say it's a facade, because I think that's what he really was like, but it was hard to get beneath that surface. He definitely came across that he was upbeat, trying to remain upbeat, but sad. Not as gregarious or as operating at such a high level. Like, his comedy even felt a little bit muted, felt slightly depressed, where it was visible that, oh, he's struggling. He's going through something. And he was very vehement about wanting to continue and not wanting to disappoint me. And I was like, it's not a disappointment. If you need time off, take it. Who cares? We're not going to replace you ever. You're always welcome to come back. So I think that was meaningful for him, but it definitely felt like he was going through something that he wasn't going to share with me. He would be down on himself, like he wasn't doing a good enough job, and he didn't know if he had the skill set for it, and why wasn't the audience more engaged, or why wasn't the audience laughing?
She let Brody be himself until it just got to a point where, there was a little more anger coming out every now and then.
People were worried about him for sure.
I do warm up. I know how this is supposed to go. I've got it. And so if he got a note, he was never real good with the notes. She stuck with him because he had a couple incidents. She saved his job many times. She could have fired him 100 times before.
There was an issue where he was getting too aggressive if the crowd wasn't responsive enough, and slightly verbally accosting them. I think that was an issue.
I remember when he got fired from Chelsea Lately, he was just waiting for me out inside the parking lot. And he was in between tears, and out of all the jobs, out of all the people, and he's right, that gave me the leeway and knew who I was to be me. How did I lose this job? And does that mean I'm eventually going to lose every job that I ever have? I remember thinking to myself, I've never seen him quite like that. I was like, oh, my friend is actually really sick. But I believe if I recall correctly, that was right around the time he had a break.
He had to deal with everything everybody else has to deal with in show business, but at the same time, he's trying to get this medical concoction right in his brain. And he had gone to Montreal Comedy Festival, and when he came back, he felt like he was getting noticed and recognized, and I think he just wanted to be over this hump in his head, and he went off the meds at that point, and that's when, all that hell broke loose.
He'd gone off his meds, which he'd done a couple times, and thought he was fine. And then they start to slip a little bit, and then he doesn't realize it, and all that stuff happens, and you're not really self-aware. And, he started getting emotional, and it was happening. And so he had a meltdown at Chelsea. And around the same time, there was a party at Sarah Silverman's house, and he showed up very manic. And everyone's like, oh, Brody, what's going on? And it was obvious that there was something wrong. So we knew that something was going on, and he had gone off his meds.
I had been so used to him being crazy and walking to a line and coming back from it that I wasn't as alarmed as everybody else right off the bat. I was more just listening to him and trying to figure out where he's coming from. He would say, I'm riding a wave of mania. It feels good.
I saw Brody, whether it was on the internet or even in person, being a little scary.
Where he's in the drive-thru of McDonald's just ranting and raving. It's not that I wasn't concerned. It's just that there was times where he could be crazy, and then there's times where he's joking around. And there was a lot of stuff that he was doing where I was like, wow, he's still fully in control of the joking part. So then you go, well, okay, so then he's okay, and then this will just fade, or then he'll get tired of it. He'll start taking the drugs again.
I would hear from his pals, have you heard from Brody? Or, can you check in with Brody? And Dave Rath would hit me up and go, if you see Brody, tell him to call me, that kind of stuff.
And we tried to, me and Howard Kremer and Joe Wagner and a few other people, Dennis Gubbins and Zach, try to figure out the best way to handle it. And we didn't know. We really didn't. We sought help. We got advice. And the general advice was he needs to be put into the psych ward, and he needs to get back on medication. But he wasn't willing to do it. We had talked to him. We tried again. He wasn't going to do it. He didn't want to do it. And the only way to do it at that point is something very difficult to do with a friend. The fact that we had to, get him arrested basically for his own good.
They had a whole sting operation, and Dave Rath had people watching. And that's when they came to arrest him. They called the authorities.
He eventually went into the UCLA medical place. He was supposed to be there for 3 days, and they kept him there for 17. I remember going to visit him, and it was because I knew going in, this was now serious. This wasn't Brody joking around. This was real serious.
He was very resentful of it and still fighting until the meds kind of kicked in, and he was starting to even out a little bit, but still somewhat defiant.
He always felt like that was a betrayal in his mind. I guess it's a loss of faith that he was out of control, so he was angry about that. In hindsight, I am really glad that he got help at that point.
Everyone was very careful after he was hospitalized. I remember that, very concerned and careful with him, not to overload him and to be supportive of him. And I think he never denied it or tried to lie about anything, but I think there was an element where he was slightly embarrassed that everybody knew about it.
Your parents were fighting or something happened?
No, they were fine. I was nuts.
You were nuts?
Yeah.
Oh, well, we have a lot to talk about. You come into your apartment while you were showering after you said you had a gun on Twitter? Because that's what happened to me. I got framed. They came into my house. They threw me down nude on a chair. Practically sat on my testicle. And these cops, they wouldn't give me a towel. He gave me a sham wow to cover up. That's negative. Well, I turned it into a positive. I punched 2 holes into it and turned it into a Snuggie.
Enough time had passed that Comedy Central was like, hey, this is really interesting. We saw the HBO stuff. Now that he's out and recovering, maybe we should tell the rest of the story. So Mike Gibbons and Zach and we said, okay, we'll give it a shot. But ultimately, we all actually came to the conclusion that it probably wasn't the best thing for Brody, so we only did 6 more.
Comedy Central saw it and loved it, and Comedy Central bought the whole idea and said, let's fluff this up and let's make 12 episodes, half-hour episodes. Let's put it on Comedy Central. And he called and said, can you come back to LA and we'll stay together and we'll work for about a year. We'll do this show. And I'm like, okay. And so I came back, and for the first few weeks, it was like really good. But then he would start to get demanding. He would have moments where he was just off the rails with rudeness and yelling, and nobody knew what to do with it. And so we'd all just kind of shut down, give him space. They would almost use me as kind of a buffer. Teina, can you talk to Brody about this? But then, he would have blow-ups, and he would yell at the staff and tell people, why don't you just go home then? You shouldn't even be part of this.
He was really depressed. I've never seen anybody who needed love as much as he did.
He was on 4 things for antidepressant, anti-anxiety, schizophrenia, something, and then 1 for cholesterol. So the joke was he's on 4 for the brain and 1 for the vein that I told him. And so he used that a bunch of times in the series, where there's one scene where he's like arguing with Zach about the medication. Zach, I'm on 4 for the brain and 1 for the vein. And yeah, it got to be where he would call me and be like, okay, I'm on this new set or whatever. Like, what's going on? I can't sleep. I can't get a boner. I don't know what to do. It's like, I can't sleep, but then I can't wake up.
We'd heard about these manic episodes and these holds that he was put under in hospitals and against his will at different times. And I left it to the experts and tried to be his friend unconditionally when I saw him. I wasn't going to be the one to lecture him or tell him how to live or how to think or how to feel. I was just going to be there as a sponge to accept his energy. When the show premiered, he had a party. And I went because it was such a signal to show business that if you're funny and you commit to what you're doing, you'll make it. And I was like, this might be Brody's only real show business party. This might be his only moment. This might be the time to show up for Brody. So I went there, and I have pictures of me and him at his premiere party in front of the Step and Repeat. And it was a real Hollywood moment for Brody. And the show was really fun. It was not what you'd expect. It was much deeper than I had anticipated, story-wise, and had all these great celebrity cameos in it. And I was really happy for Brody. I was proud of Brody.
Just making it was just like a lot of work and a lot of stress, and tested some of his personal friendships.
I didn't go, and a couple other people didn't go because he had been so crazy to us in the last few days that we just thought, let's just finish the project. Let's just separate and let Brody do his thing. You know, almost worried that he would do something more embarrassing if we showed up to these things. So all of that got apologized for and got made up in the next few months.
He was funny, and he would have flashes of focus and things like that. And I think ultimately the 12 episodes we got from Comedy Central, from, you know, the beginning of it through the breakdown and then the aftermath, it's really an interesting arc of 12 episodes of comedy of this guy's life. And he got a kind of Comedy Central half-hour special after that, and went to Boston, and he did all the interstitial stuff that season for that show, where he did all the interviews with all the comedians in Boston. So he was kind of on a little bit of a roll here, and, you know, feeling good. We got Conan. He was feeling, you know, that, you know, maybe he would have some success.
And it probably was disheartening for him to think like that this was going to be a long-term ongoing problem, that even fame and validation or whatever, all that stuff, like it was still going to be something they had to manage forever. And I think that it's just a lot of pressure.
This is my life. I'm professional. I make money. It's a good feeling to be able to take my mother out to lunch and pay half. I can do that. Let's go. It's not, you're not in a red box machine. This is life, man.
The Death Squad Network's Brody and Esther podcast series followed Brody's struggles to rebalance himself professionally, personally, and medicinally. The comedy industry remained supportive. He appeared on Live Nation's 2013 and 2014 inaugural Oddball comedy tours of amphitheaters and arenas.
It wasn't really until after he went to the hospital that I got to know him much better, because he needed a place to live. And I was like, come live in my building. And he was like, okay. He was looking to be closer to the clubs, and he wanted to be near people he knew. And it was really nice for a time to like have him in the building. You know, I'd go to his place, he'd come to mine. It was almost like dealing with a toddler who like didn't know how to do very basic things. Like I've always felt like I'm someone that struggles with that. So to see someone who could do even less than I could was like shocking. I remember taking him to Trader Joe's and like helping him pick out groceries. We would hike together every day at 7 p.m. We met outside of our building and we'd go to Runyon. We hosted the podcast together, and he really wanted to keep things positive. And I can't remember who came up with SPF, but it was safe, positive, fun.
He cared about comedians that were coming up. He looked out for people. He would give them advice. Not always the best advice, but he was trying. And he knew what to do, even if he didn't always do it himself.
He's just like, let's be safe and positive. And like, it felt like this gift. I couldn't believe it was real. This man who wanted nothing from me, who just wanted company and companionship and someone to tag along on the hike with and to follow the stupid rules. I just can't believe I had that opportunity as like a young woman in my 20s to spend so much time getting close to a man who was more successful in my business and just wanted a sidekick. It's like he really was his own kind of cult leader. It felt good to have a leader who was successful and hilarious and vulnerable. So he sort of taught all of us, without maybe intentionally doing so, like that we could be those things. Like we could set those boundaries and rules. We don't have to talk about violence. We don't have to talk about sex. No one else was like that.
Push, Kremer, push. I like everything you're doing. I need 5% more energy. We went on tour and he would say, you need to walk faster. You need to walk with more purpose. And then I, of course, would, start arguing with him. He'd go, Kremer, you teach me things. Let me teach you things too. So then I started walking faster.
That stuff he's saying out loud, he's saying for himself. That's how many times a day he needs to tell his demons, relax. The amount of times that he was saying it to everybody else, that was for himself.
Even though he had all his problems, like he was ultimately so positive and wanted to work in Hollywood and be accepted in Hollywood. And so he kept things, TV friendly, so to speak, at the time. He would always say he was my stepfather. As I'm a little older now and struggling with my own mental health, I finally understand why he always preached positive energy. I find myself saying it to people and then being like, oh my God, like that is literally what Brody was asking of all of us. And I thought he was joking. But here I am, 34 years old, and I'm asking people in my life to just bring positive energy. It was real. He really needed that from us.
The constant affirmation and repetition to psych himself up, because he really was not positive, and that came through sometimes too, where, he didn't have a lot of confidence in his own ability to have a career and all those other things. So, and he was very negative sometimes, and he just, complained a lot, and he had a lot of gripes and grudges. And so I feel all that stuff was overcompensation, but in a good way. He didn't want to spread his negativity. I think he probably felt self-conscious about it and overdid it by this philosophy of, and try and enjoy everything and push and believe and positive energy.
Most comics are very phony. You saw that Brody wasn't phony because everything he did, he wore on his sleeves.
And I think that translated for whether he was at Largo or opening, in front of 10,000 people at an outdoor festival.
They sent me out with him. He was going to work the first stage at this oddball tour where it was Dave Chappelle's comeback. I went on 6 of them, and they sent me out really as like almost a babysitter.
Brody and I were the 2 hosts of the oddball tour. Brody did the side stage with local comics, and he would nurture them and help them and give them these rock star intros, and he'd help them get over their nerves. And then he'd come over and support me and hang out with me on the main stage. We shared a dressing room, so, he would stretch and I would smoke pot. We became very brotherly, and we'd eat together. We'd, head over to the venue together. And if I couldn't make a show, he would fill in for me.
I flew around with him kind of to make sure that he was stable and that there was like a friendly face there, because then he would have moments on the tours in the hotel rooms. Mass, I don't feel like it. I don't want to da-da-da. I wish, maybe I should just go home, and I'm like, oh, man, you got to do it. I mean, it's like, Chappelle, are you joking? Like, you have to well, I don't know if I'm going to get onto the second stage tonight. They want me on the, just all this like angst and like worry.
He wanted to be on the main stage, and they were bringing him up to host on the secondary stage. It was a smaller crowd, and every once in a while they had a spot for him on the main stage, and he's paid commensurate to that, and it wasn't as much as the big headliner comedians that were actually selling tickets were getting, and something he wasn't always that receptive to hear, but that's really what it's about. If you're a name that can sell tickets, you're going to earn more money, and for him, it wasn't quite there.
I saw him texting constantly, talking about how they're ripping him off. And so I called him and I talked to him for like a couple hours. And I was like, do you understand? Most people would kill to be on this tour. Yeah, you're not making a lot of money, but you're now becoming more known in the comedy industry.
We were playing big rock star venues, and we really enjoyed seeing our names on those dressing rooms and hearing the roar of those giant outdoor crowds. I believe it's where I learned how to work a big room, to work these arenas that I get to work sometimes. I think Brody taught me a lot about playing out to the bleachers and playing out to the lawn seats.
And he was really like openly complaining about it.
We were on different ends of the comedy spectrum. And so we always had questions for each other. My questions always fell on, what can I do, dude, to get these people, my peers, to respect me more? How come I can't get a person to sit in this back row and watch my set at 10? And at 1 a.m., people are literally driving down from the hills to park in the parking lot and watch your set. And he was just like, help me with the business. I would always talk to him about, man, you have so much respect from other comics. I mean, I was like, I'm so envious. And he was like, yeah, you can pay your rent. He was like, yeah, that respect doesn't buy me a fucking gallon of milk at Ralph's. You know, him being respected but not making money didn't make him feel good.
He'd go into these dark places like, why aren't they doing better? Why isn't the audience laughing? What's going on? Why won't this one call me back? Why don't I have a woman? Why don't I have a bigger career?
He never found anything that was close to a position that he respected himself. I don't think he thinks he was as good as he was. And I don't think he thought about anybody else except himself. And maybe that's a bad thing to say, but I did.
He was really focused on what are people thinking? What are they saying? Were there any hot chicks? And it's like, that meant a lot to him.
And as somebody that knew him off stage, he was exactly the same on stage as he was off stage. Some of the same gripes he had on stage, he would continue on off stage in the back.
You were always wondering, is it a character? Is he a character? Is it real? What is it? I just remember never being certain of what he really was. And then I remember talking to him in the hallway of the Comedy Store, and he just had like a self-awareness I had never seen before. And I remember being like, oh no, he knows what he's doing. He knows that he is ultimately draining some of us, because he would just go on and on about things. You'd get caught up in it and you'd wonder, like, does he know what he's doing? And I think he did.
He was really big on that honesty, really big honesty person, which is why he told everybody what he was going through and all that.
I think his whole act was that. It was him in a therapy session. I really believe that. And I used to say, you know, we laugh, but in a way it's really, really sad.
But he couldn't help it and didn't want to be fake and didn't want anyone to think that he was putting on a character, that this is really who he was. Although it was sort of uncensored and amplified, it was still him.
He had such a strong foundation of how to approach this career. And I think he was very successful. Like, it's just like his mental illness took over. And I think it took over a lot earlier than maybe people would think.
People were laughing with him, but I still think in the bottom of my heart, it was a cry for help.
Great news, guys. I just booked another movie. Yes! It's an adult video out in Chatsworth. I'm doing a solo scene on a yoga mat. Called Downward Dog. Downward Doggy style. Thank you for being here. Welcome to the Comedy Store. I was in The Hangover. Did you see me in that? You saw me on a TV show? Oh, really? Oh, you know more about me than... Yeah, I'm feeling better now. I had a show on Comedy Central that was like around when Twitter just got started, and I had I lashed out on Twitter. I pulled the Kanye West kind of thing, and my friends called the police on me. I got detained at a Starbucks. I front kicked somebody here in the parking lot. I threatened somebody with a Slurpee straw outside of a Redbox machine. I was practicing my line from The Hangover. I was essentially riding the wave of mania, and it felt great.
Brody's Festival of Friendship podcast continued helping him assess his life and move forward to a future of positive energy with comedy pals old and new. His Periscope account, Steps with Steve, connected him to viewers around the world, ultimately gathering just shy of 140,000 followers and 34 million likes. And after 22 years in comedy, he recorded his first hour special, 2017's Brody Stevens, Live from the Main Room.
Hey, my name's Jeff Ross. You know, we think of Brody as a narcissist because he was always live casting on his phone. He was periscoping on his phone all the time and looking at his own face, and every day he posted a selfie of himself. But he was not an egomaniac. It's interesting that he was a narcissist but without a big ego.
I'm Esther Povitsky. Periscope worked so well for him because it gave him a 24-hour ability to entertain and to creatively express himself. Him having that in his pocket and knowing he could go live at any time and talk to people, whether it was 200 people or literally 7 people, I think that really empowered him, and it was really a positive thing in his life.
My name's Dave Rath. It was a medium that was created for him. He had a big following.
My name is Teina Manu, Prince of Periscope.
I'm Howard Kremer, doing his proclamations and his neighborhood watch and just his self-appointed opinions.
My name is Josh Wolf. He knew how popular he was on there, and people were accepting him for him. He was accepted for all his nooks and crannies and loved for it. And so, I think Periscope made him feel really good about himself.
I used to take notes on some of the Periscope stuff because I was like, all this stuff is like great jokes or, that close to being a joke. And I wanted him to just do a lot of it on stage.
He's talking, gets out of his car, parks at the Comedy Store, walks up, shows the list. Yes, high fives a couple people down the hallway. His name is announced. He goes on, never breaking the Periscope. He goes on stage, films his set, gets off. Hey, everybody, how'd you like that?
On stage, you have 15 minutes. During those Periscopes, you get a more well-rounded view of who he was and why he was like that. And so all the little nuanced things that on stage seemed like, you had more of a chance to get to know the person as opposed to just 15 minutes, what the fuck am I watching?
It's this idea of this virtual experience of I can just check in and where is he today? It's a constant. It's something I can go to. He's walking over, he's going to Starbucks. He ran into this homeless person. He's talking about this. What is he talking about? A lot of times it was just him walking and not much going on. And it's funny because he shows up on Google Maps sometimes.
I thought long form Brody was so much better. When I watched him on stage, I always felt like he wants this laugh so badly. He wants this acceptance so badly. And the Periscope just seems so much more relaxed. I personally, as much as I loved watching him on stage, I love those Periscopes more than anything.
I just have so much respect for that version of Brody that when he was struggling, he still flipped on live on Periscope and talked to people.
The goal wasn't to have a small audience. He wanted to do a special. You know what I mean? Even at the Comedy Store, they loved him. He never got an 11 o'clock spot. He never got a 10 o'clock spot. So as much as he was loved, he still felt like, I'm the outlier at 1 a.m. who's got to keep these fucking crazy people who have stayed on a Wednesday. At the same time, maybe 1 or 2 people in the world could have kept those 8 people in their seats. And he was one of them, for sure.
It's a perfect spot for the relief pitcher. where it's his job to come up at the end of the night. People are tired, and he would step up to that, and he would take it seriously. And somebody that's going to take on that level of responsibility and stress is, I think eventually it's going to get to you. It eventually did get to him. But what a heroic attempt to be that person, to be like, I'll do it. Don't worry.
A lot of times it didn't go great, and the audience would turn on him, and then he would turn on them, and then sometimes he would get them back, and sometimes he didn't. But that's why he got the midnight spot at the Comedy Store for, a good chunk of time.
That was really sold to him as this special spot. It's the Kinnison spot. But yeah, he was not happy with that. He did not want the last spot on the lineup. He wanted a better spot. And I personally feel like I saw him have his best sets when he went up in the OR in the Comedy Store, and it was a hot crowd and it was in the middle of things. Like, I do think that he thrived then. I was grateful that the club gave him that spot to have that creative freedom, and I think he was the right person for it. But I also think you throw Brody up in a crowd and he just brings them alive, and that helps everyone on the lineup.
There was a great approach to that special. Like, he wasn't going to tell anybody. He's going to start when the room was empty.
He wanted it to be late. He wanted it to look like and show people what it was like to be him. He didn't want any filters. He wanted it to look like how he really did it. One of these midnight spots where people were tired, they've already seen great comics, and that he had to pick them back up again.
The special really came out of wanting to duplicate that experience in some way. And we did have a long lineup on in front of him. We wanted to get the crowd that was in there a little punchy and a little tired. And we didn't go crazy selling tickets or promoting it or anything.
And that's what he wanted the special to be, talking with a crowd, almost like fighting for laughs. If he said Brody Stevens special, people would have filled it in and laughed and all that.
I was furious at him because he came up to me and he said, hey, what I'd like you to do, I'd like you to come there and open the show for me and like kind of clear out the room and get rid of some people because I want it more like a late night vibe because there was a lot of people. And they had somebody come up and kind of like escort me off. I said, Brody, why wouldn't you tell them that you told me to do that? You embarrassed me in front of Dave Rath and all these other people out there that I don't want to be embarrassed in front of.
It was usually Barris controlling the chaos. And this time for the special, Brody had it in mind to do it that way and get that moment. He had his set, but obviously within that, he created a lot of space to improv and to do his throwaway lines, and there weren't really any particular order to that stuff. We wanted to get in the drumming. He walks through and he does his Kreskin impression of guessing things and finding connections with people.
So he was really proud of the special, even though people were like, it was a little bit weird, it was a little bit empty, it was like, and he's like, exactly.
What people thought of him pre-social media wasn't readily available. But to do that special and to read some of those comments, which I know he did, he was like, they don't get it. It was really very hurtful to him.
I don't get it. What is this? Who is this guy? He's not funny.
Everyone advised him, don't read it, don't look at it. And for him, it was everything to be liked and wanting to be famous. And he could not take the criticism. He was obsessed with reading the chatter and reading the hate stuff, then the positive stuff, questioning whether he was a fraud or not and wanting to be respected.
He would always say trolls are terrorists. So that was him, like protecting America in his own way.
I think that the social media started making him crazy because I really feel he wanted to tell his entire life like he's writing his autobiography on Twitter. And he should have kind of shut his mouth a lot.
He was so profoundly affected by the negative comments. It's so weird to sit here and be like borderline in tears, but also feel so silly. It is so absurd that someone's negative comments could affect a human that profoundly. Like, it just is so heartbreaking. But like, he just couldn't help but obsess over the negative comments on his frickin' special on Amazon. It's so awful that he couldn't see what we saw, which was a comedic genius.
Am I on an anxiety medication? Yes, I am. Because I tried to go natural, But that's what happens. That's what happens. I hear things. I'm sensitive. I have adult onset autism. I'm jumpy.
He could have stopped doing the midnight spot. He could have like chilled out, let me get out of comedy for a while, but he felt needed. He always wanted to be the one that I'll take on the crowd. I'll take on the energy. You guys need me. I'll be the energy guy. Give me my drumsticks. Rather than like, I'm not feeling it tonight. I'm having these issues. We all have these issues, and sort of just bring a low show. And he's never wanted to do that.
He was always driving out to Palm Desert to see his mom and Daisy needs her kibble. And he would give updates on that to everybody. There was always action. There was something always going on. We would just take walks. We started doing a podcast together. He was obsessed with selling his moped. That would have been as big as, getting on Letterman or getting an HBO special. So, gotta sell this moped.
We were working on a sports concept, Brody's Baseball Life, where he had access to spring training and locker rooms and ball players and MLB. We were going to shoot a spring training, and he seemed to be very much into it. I had a field producer and a director going out to Arizona, planning a trip, and I always thought maybe that by keeping him occupied and keeping him working and focused, that would help some way. And I learned since that generally doesn't.
Did he know, like, I might not make it till 60, till 70? I already know where I'm at. I'm already having these issues. And maybe I'll just help everybody I can while I have this last time left.
He was obviously slipping. He would get a little more emotional, and you could tell that there was some darkness creeping in, and that's what happens when you're off your meds, I guess. And we had breakfast, and he told me he did, and we talked about why. You get off stage and he's numb. He didn't have the adrenaline rush that you get, whether you do well or you do poorly, to at least drive you to do it again. It didn't happen. Like a lot of people complain about the lethargy and it felt like a zombie. And for him, it was that absence of adrenaline after he performed, and then the drive to keep writing and it just all kind of was a vicious cycle.
He kept switching these things over the years, different levels, and never really did get to, I guess, and I don't know if there is a right mix. It's just after you start tweaking these things and changing milligrams, and then here's another one.
He talked about Lexapro a lot.
Klonopin, sort of this generic feel, oh, hey, man. You just feel totally cool with everybody and relax. And he said he would need one for that when it would anxiety. But then it would be so low and so like blah. And so this one was to a little pep you up. And that was this. And I go, God, it's just like every mood is adjusted by these chemicals.
The only podcast I ever recorded but didn't air was one I did with him at my house. And I'm glad I didn't air it because he melted down. And I remember when he was walking out, I said to him, I'm going to hold on to this. Call me tomorrow if you want me to post it. And I told him, I wouldn't post this if I were you. But in that podcast, I remember asking him, are you ever Steve Brody anymore? He said, the line is so blurred that I don't know if I am.
I said, well, you got to go back to your doctor. He said, I did. I went back, and we're going to go back on. But this is the dangerous period, is the next 6 weeks, generally speaking, is when your brain recalibrates, I think, to going back on the meds.
He knew that it was like, obviously it was serious. And I don't know anything about pills, really. Even when he would talk about, I'm on the Lamictal, maybe it should be 72 grams instead of 74 grams. And I was just like kind of lost.
We determined that we would be in touch with him. We were calling him every day. Someone was with him every day.
I think it was just exhaustion. I think he had had enough of the ups and downs and the swings and not feeling normal and like sleeping too much and then not sleeping at all. Being all wired. He maybe felt like, I'm not bringing it anymore. I'm not happy enough. I'm not joyful. I'm not pushing it. I'm not able now to lift the room because I personally am not able to lift myself. He's like, I'm okay. I've done what I could, but if I can't be Brody for everybody, then I just don't want to be here. Like it's just too sorry.
He didn't want to be a burden to his friends. He told me outright, I'm not going back to the hospital. I'm not doing that again. In that moment, there seems to be only one choice, I think. And unfortunately, it's not a good one.
the last 2 podcasts I did with him, one on mine, one on his, were the most fun I had with Brody in years. And he was like saying really positive things. I had talked to Brody a lot about, hey, we should take, because I have my Ding Dong show, and he would always come up and play with us there. And I said, we should do that. We should do the band. It could be really fun. I was really happy that I was actually doing stuff with him, and we were on the same team instead of fighting.
Tuesday at Pleasure Chest. Yeah, he went up. He had a good set. I went up after him, and that was it. I mean, I do remember him being more interested and effusive than usual. I had that. I was like, wow, I just said something, and like he fully paid attention. He was like listening. It was odd to take note of that, and then realize like, oh, like he might have resigned himself already at that point.
He was still working, still developing his act. 2 days before, I saw him at the Comedy Store, and he had a new joke that was hilarious. And he could hear me laughing, and when he knew I was in the room, he would introduce me. This guy gets it, and give me a shout out. I always wanted him to know that I was watching him. I was in the back.
We were sitting in that back row in the OR, and he was so excited about touring. And he was like, I'm really excited to get out there. All he was talking about was the future.
Wednesday night, and I saw him walking. Yeah. And as he's walking out, hey, Brody, he looked like he was a ghost. And I remember thinking, are you all right?
We're supposed to tape a podcast, and he didn't call back. And it was just odd that he didn't call back at all. So I went over there that morning, and he wasn't answering the door.
They had planned to do a podcast, and then right after that, Brody was going to go drive up to San Luis Obispo.
He was supposed to do shows. We were supposed to record the podcast, and then the next day he was going to leave to do shows. So I just figured, oh, he must have like left early, or he didn't want to juggle the two things.
Get ready for the festival and go do that, and you'll come back and maybe take some time off and really focus on taking care of yourself. And he was excited at one point about doing the festival, but that was the big tell. He didn't show up. He was supposed to be on the road that day.
That was rough. I remember there was a police officer outside his place when we were over there, and she goes, what does he do for a living? You know, they're just taking information. And I'm like, he's a comedian. And she's like writing it down. It's like, you might have seen him in the Hangover too. It was just so odd and bizarre to be doing that joke of a credit thing, you know, cut out of funny people with the cops.
Obviously, I wish we'd all done more, but we're all going to look at it and go, fuck, what could I have done? But then the experts say nothing. Well, it's up to Brody, and whatever his malfunction was out of our control.
And I'm seeing all these things, the commercials, just talk to them. I don't know if that could have been something that would have saved Brody. I don't know.
The last Periscope of his that I watched, someone asked him, like, where has Esther been? And he said that I had been busy. And it really, like, makes me so sad, because anyone put yourself in my position. Like, you watch this last video of your friend before he took his life, and he's like saying that you've been busy.
I still listen to it. I still listen to the end to hear his voice, you know, at the very end, and to try to imagine what place he was in, and try to imagine that it was still a good place somehow. That even though he was going to leave, and even though he was sort of done, he wasn't quitting. He wasn't just giving up. He was saying, like, this is the best I could do. This is all I have left.
It just puts me in this position of feeling like I should have been there. I've done a lot of work to learn that, like, there's nothing I could have done.
Some family and friends were able to go through his apartment afterwards. He had kept like 100-something of our shows on VHS tape from the 90s. And so, thank goodness. And so I have those.
He had collected a lot of sports memorabilia and a lot of figurines from Major League Baseball, unopened, that he just had hanging on his wall.
He had 2 really nice baseball gloves Mike Messina had given him.
I have his Cubs World Series tickets from when the Cubs won, because he's got friends in the Cubs. This jacket that they gave him, the Cubs, sort of the satin warm-up jacket, I have that. His jacket that was from when he did his first Comedy Central special.
Seeing his baseball card, numerous different headshots, like he's getting hired because of his good looks. But all that going on, and just tambourines, drumsticks, the hand grips that you're constantly exercising with the hand grips. I just thought, why does someone need 4 different pairs of these?
American flags on the closet doors. It was funny is he had all these like single mom like affirmation plaques, or it'd be like live life, love. It'd be like family and prayer live here.
A lot of those positive sayings that he had all over his walls. You're the best.
I tell myself to push and believe. I do. I tell myself to push and believe.
His community remembers Brody, and his fans remember Brody in the same way they remember Rodney Dangerfield, and they imitate his voice, and they remember his jokes. The ultimate sad sack, the ultimate woe is me. Arms folded, negative energy. It's just like you remember his stuff. And I just think that he's one of those rare individuals that just sort of keeps going even after they're gone.
Arms crossed, negative. The attitude. Yes, you got it. Good guy.
You hear someone maybe just by chance speak in his cadence.
There'll be like an announcer who'll go, enjoy it.
There's so many Brodyisms. I'm intense. I get BO in the shower. I once tried to suck my own dick. My dick was long enough, but my neck was too short.
Jokes like, I was watching Finding Nemo the other night, overshot my nut rag.
This morning I did 1,000 crunches, Captain Crunches.
I once masturbated on a spider and gave it web eye. Or something like that one. Let me see. I'm a pretty hairy guy. I went swimming out on Venice Beach and clogged the drain. I've been a model for years in Serbia. He also have a bunch of things. I'm one of the pioneering Jews of the Southwest. I put turquoise in my matzah.
I was beaten by my sister with her keys. She worked as a janitor.
My sister asked me to go with her to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Museum this summer. And before I could even answer her, I just started quoting Brody's joke. I said to my sister, there's a Nickelback tour jacket at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And she said, there is? And I said, yeah, it's in the Lost and Found, but still.
The one about being molested in the construction zone, he would draw that out. Even the first time I saw it, I was like, this weird guy, like, why is he telling this story? It's like, this is a bummer. And then it would just end the way he did.
I was molested as a child. And they caught the guy, right? He was supposed to get 3 years in prison, but they gave him 6 because I was molested in a construction zone.
We laughed in the moment, but you look back and you're like, I think that was real. And I think you were trying to tell us something. And I wish that someone had like held out their hand and been like, come here, let's talk about it.
I always laughed at his 818 till I die. A little Jewish kid from the 818 area saying that was just killer funny to me.
If you stitch together his strongest stuff, I mean, it's a pretty compelling argument for greatness.
There were so many, actually, that are just brilliant jokes that kind of convey the true genius of his mind. And then the silly jokes are a whole other category that are just goofy and silly and half throwaway jokes, but were funny because he did them. And then there were all the real stuff that were kind of jokes, but really cries for help.
Is he going to be mentioned in there with the Eddie Murphys of generations from now? I don't know. Did he do something in comedy that was something beautiful and free? Yes.
Brody had such diverse fan base. I remember Dick Van Dyke and his wife Arlene telling me on a couple of occasions how much they loved Brody and how funny they thought he was and how original. And when Dick Van Dyke thinks you're original,
He went to Clayton Kershaw's Cy Young Award winner, performed at his 30th birthday party as a private fly-in by his wife. What level is that? Clayton Kershaw's surprise birthday gift was Brody. And then he introduced me to Arlene Silver, who's Dick Van Dyke's wife. And I mean, Cy Young Award winners, 90-year-old Hollywood legends, who spans that range?
Even if you really love somebody's art, it's rare that the whole package is just a shocking and fascinating surprise. And he was.
This is a crazy, like, rock and roll factoid. He first went on stage at the Comedy Underground in Seattle when I met him. According to Carl Warmenhoven, the old manager, who kept all of the open mic sign-up sheets since the 80s. So I was able to ask Carl, when did Brody first go up in Seattle? When did he do his first open mic? February 22nd, 1994. The exact day that he died. That's too much.
There's never been anyone like him since or after.
Here's a person of real achievement. He really did become a high-level college pitcher. He really did befriend all these celebrities and get into movies. He really did get the Sam Kinison spot at the Comedy Store. And so as much as he was goofy and this weird character, he also had a lot of legitimate achievements.
Let's get some energy. I'm an energy guy. You saw great comedians. You'll see more great comedians. Stop watching me. Stop observing me. Start bringing it.
A few days before he died, he started texting me and messaging me this, like, really heartfelt, hey, buddy, I miss you. I know we've had ups and downs over the years, but we did 2 TV shows together. We should be really proud of that. He was going to be coming up to Seattle, like in May, and let's hang out, let's do some shows. I go, of course, man, it'd be great to see you. And then a couple days later, when he died, I realized what they all meant. I realized what he was doing, what he was saying to me. He still had enough of himself there to apologize and to tell his friends that that he was going to be gone, that he was letting us know that I'm leaving now, and you guys need to remember me and keep going, to be funny, do comedy, positivity. Don't forget me. Don't change yourself was his whole thing. Be who you are.
And that was really the thesis statement of being a Comedy Store comedian. There's this quote below the ticket counter in the original room that's like, you go up on the stage, you have 3 minutes for the open mic, and you don't have to be funny, you just have to be yourself, essentially. I think Brody really lived that.
There's a big picture of him in the back hall of the Comedy Store, and there's a lot of Brody merch, shirts, buttons, everywhere you go. He's sort of this ubiquitous figure still.
New comics would come up to me after he died, and they were like, oh, I was nobody. I was an open micer. And Brody, I met him. And then, like, after the open mic, that I met this guy who was, like, in The Hangover. And, he's got these celebrity friends. And they said, he friended me on Facebook. And I was nobody. And so this is that person lifting everyone else out of the pit.
The things he was saying were not just silly, but they were actually things that I now need and implement in my own life. Like reminding myself to stay positive and being excited when I meet someone whose dad is from my hometown. Like those are ways that I feel like Brody is staying with me.
It's not just remembering the person we lost, but spreading that positive energy into the next generation of comedy fans. And I think that's a big win on Brody's scoreboard.
He was so vulnerable. He just nailed it on the vulnerability scale in a way that most men cannot do. What man in their 40s is going up there and sharing their most weakest vulnerabilities?
He was a true original, and there was no false veil that a lot of comedians have on stage. I think that's who he was, and he affected a generation of young comics at the Comedy Store specifically to strive to find a way to be more honest in what they do.
He was himself through and through, and what a great example to set. A really cool person. You'll spend time with them, you walk away and you want to be just like them. But a really, really amazing, the best kind of person is someone that you spend time with and they're so themselves that you walk away and you're like, oh, I want to be more like myself. And that's what Brody was.
I feel so lucky to have crossed paths with that unicorn, to really experience a guy like that firsthand, up close for a couple of decades. I feel really lucky. I feel really lucky.
He's an original, and we all are doing everything we can to keep his memory alive because he was truly funny, and we loved him a lot.
Mental health is not a joke. We'd always say, oh, he's crazy. Comics crazy. They're nuts, man. Wow, he's wild. But we started to take it more seriously.
We have Comedy Gives Back, which is helping not just comedians, but comedians that are specifically in trouble emotionally or mentally, and they don't have health insurance necessarily unless they're in SAG, which a lot of them are not. And so Comedy Gives Back is there to kind of help fill the void for support, and especially with mental health and outreach. We just had an 818 festival where we did a walk and we unveiled a mural up in Reseda near the bench that's in his name, near the ball field that he played as a kid. This happens to be a comedian who is a public figure, but it's every day. It's everyone around us. There are people just fighting this stuff constantly, which is why all this is so important to talk about.
We just didn't take mental health seriously as a society up until very recently. And it pains me so much to know that he was like the first one to be so honest about being medicated and needing to be medicated. Here we are now celebrating that, I think, as a culture, certainly more than we used to. And like, he's not even here for it. But it's like, he was the first person to be open about being medicated. I'm on Lexapro now, and Lexapro has changed my fucking life. I'm comfortable publicly speaking about it because of people like Brody, who would make jokes about his Lamictal. So cheesy to say ahead of his time, but he was.
This is my life. You know, you're out having fun. Maybe somebody here had a Groupon. Maybe I spit. But I'll tell you what, you're probably staying at a nice hotel tonight. I go back home to my thin-walled apartment in the San Fernando Valley, and I sleep on an air mattress. And it's depressing. Literally, there's a hole in it. I have dealt with so many obstacles tonight, and I had fun. You can find me in the main room on the weekends, sometimes. You can find me in the main room on Wednesday nights, sometimes. You can find me on Monday nights here, sometimes. I drew the potluck. I drew number 9. That's on the edge. I could have gone home or stayed. I decided to stay, and I stayed because I knew this crowd was a great crowd, and I'm glad I did. Yes, this is my life. I will not go back to Red Robin. How about Dave and Buster's? Maybe Wild Wings? Maybe Saddle Ranch? Maybe Panda Express to celebrate the new Korea? Maybe Zanku Chicken, maybe Wendy's late at night. How about Jersey Mike's? The Subway doesn't know how to put the mayonnaise on the bread. They squirt it ahead of the lettuce. I want it wiped down. Pick up a knife. I don't care about the plastic gloves. I want to see a knife and spread the mayonnaise over my 12-inch wheat with tuna. In my tuna, I want lettuce, and let's toast it with some cheese, oil and vinegar, and a couple bags of chips. I eat the chip while you do your artistry, and I hide the bag of chips. I've been to Wendy's and Burger King, Carl's Jr. and In-N-Out celebrating. Sometimes I'll go and leave a tip. to the food. Bagels, cream cheese, Starbucks, Trumpa juice. Vitamin Shop, they will match Amazon, so will Best Buy. Never pay full price. Today I bought a vacuum at Walmart. It's in my car, and you can help me bring it up. I am gonna wrap this set. Thank you very much.
Positive Connections, A Brody Stevens Oral History was produced and hosted by Julie Seabaugh. Executive produced by Jack Vaughn. Audio editing by Daniel Spaventa. Engineered by Andrew Gruss, Mark Roucher, and Sam Schiavello. Mixing and sound design by James Bilodeau. Featuring Don Barris, Chelsea Handler, Esther King, Howard Kremer, Teina Manu, Dave Rath, Ron Reed, Jeff Ross, and Josh Wolf. Thank you to Stephanie Brody, Dave Rath, and Erica Ligney, with special thanks to Mauricio Alvarado of Rockin' Pins. For those in emotional distress or suicidal crisis, the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is available 24 hours a day in English and Spanish.